Chapter 30. Christmas Presents and Shotguns. All weddings, except those with shotguns in evidence, are wonderful. Liz Smith. Oh, brr. Carrie closed the door to the house behind her and handed Joseph the basket of eggs. I hate the cold. She rubbed her arms vigorously and pushed past Chris to get near the stove. Chris kept his distance. The last few weeks, Carrie had been a bit off. It felt as if she had drawn a perimeter which included a warning alarm in case anyone got too close. Snappy and tense, she had projected a clear warning to stay away. The instant he let it slip, he knew there would be trouble. It was just one small, tiny little snort, but out it came, and he immediately regretted it. She turned on him. Oh, and what are you laughing about? Man, oh man, women should come with early warning systems. Or a manual, at least. How would it read? The human female, as she enters the beginning of her monthly menstrual cycle, is a dangerous and unpredictable creature. The utmost care and concern must be shown at this time towards the female. The employment of calming methods, such as the introduction of chocolate at moments of extreme duress, coupled with a shift in attitude toward a more submissive posture from the male of the species, will avoid conflict. Under no circumstances should you engage in an argument with a premenstrual female. Avoidance and flight are perfectly acceptable solutions, enabling one to escape with all reproductive parts intact. Chris saw that Carrie was now glaring at him and tapping her foot, expecting an answer. He realized two things at once. One, he had just stood there like an idiot for about a minute, fantasizing about a manual that unfortunately did not exist. And two, he had some stupid shit-eating grin on his face, which looked as if it was further adding to her anger. Yes? The yes sounded like a hiss, and he knew he was in deep kimchi. Maybe the truth would be best. I just thought it was funny 'cause you and Liza and Joseph are from New York, and it gets really cold there. Winter down here is a walk in the park, right? His brain tuned out the words, but not the vision of her angry face yelling at him. He just stood there, let her yell, and waited until she had stalked off. It was the same response you might see from a deer that freezes, dead in the sights of a hunter, hoping beyond all hope that the hunter will somehow not see him, or perhaps take pity on him and let him go. No such luck, at least not for this human animal. God, how he wished there were a manual. Boy, Fenton snorted close by his ear. Haven't you got a lick of sense? Sir? Never say what's on your mind to a woman in that state of mind. Might as well commit, what's that word, mahi-mahi? Liza chimed in. Mahi-mahi is a fish, Gramps. You mean harikari or seppuku, which was the ritual disembowelment reserved only for samurai. Got it, Liz. Thanks. Chris interrupted, head hurting from another female voice. No matter that it was a friendly one. Gramps, if this is PMS, she's been having it for weeks. It's like everything I say or do irritates her. Give it time, son, give it time. Only God knows the minds of women, and I gotta wonder if he doesn't get confused off and on. Fenton thought of Molly, dead for more than 30 years, and smiled wryly. I can remember being in hot water a time or two myself. Seemed like after they took out all of her reproductive parts, it wasn't regular at all. She'd get mad any time, anywhere, or be preternaturally calm. You could never tell. They cooked lunch and sat down at the table together, even Carrie, who just sat and simmered at one end. Not much was said as they passed sandwich fixings around the table and enjoyed the rich flavor of the pulled pork. One of the largest pigs, butt roast, had been slaughtered, cleaned and cured a few weeks ago when the temperatures dipped down into the 40s. It had been a toss-up between who would be slaughtered, butt roast or applewood bacon, until they weighed them. Butt roast tipped the scales at 225 pounds, and applewood bacon had only weighed 202. He was slated for an early spring slaughter. Chris had been amused to discover that they named the pigs after food. It made sense, though. One of the other pigs' name was Pork Chop, and another Ham Hock. It kept the end game in plain sight. These creatures weren't pets. They were food. Chris kept stealing glances at Carrie and looking at just the wrong times. After the third glance, she startled everyone by shouting, "What?" "Nothing," Chris snapped back. God, he felt like an idiot. What in the hell was he doing wrong, anyway? Why was she so pissed at him? Fenton cleared his throat, scowled at his eldest grandchild, and asked Chris, "You said something about going into town today?" "Yes, sir. I mean, Gramps." He usually got it right, but in moments of high stress, like he'd been having for the past 3 weeks, he fell back on the crisp and forceful "sir" he'd learned as a conscript. "I was planning on a little Christmas shopping and figured I'd get in some bartering with that hog." Liza chimed in, "I'll go with you, Chris. I've got books to trade." She tried not to look too eager, but Chris knew she was hoping to visit Carl Owens, a friend from school and fellow book geek. They would trade books all right, and some gropes and kisses as well if he wasn't mistaken. Carl was 2 years older, and he had been visiting often in the last few months. He had helped out on the farm during harvest. He was a nice kid. "It's settled then," Chris said. "Liza and I will go, and—" "What about me?" Carrie looked resentful. "Did you even think of asking what I want? I mean, Carrie Lynn Perdue." Fenton stopped the beginning tirade dead in its tracks. "You have been a right large pain in the patoot recently. If you were Joseph's age, I'd send you to your room and tell you to come out when you had a new attitude. As it is, I don't know what to say to you excepting to shut it and get yourself away till you got a civil tongue in your mouth." Carrie sat there, tears forming in her eyes, opened and shut her mouth like she was about to say something, then stood up, knocking her chair back with a crash, and bolted from the room down the hall to her bedroom. Everyone sat in shock for a moment, Joseph wide-eyed, and they stared down the now empty hall. "Gramps," Liza looked devastated. "You made her cry." Chris held himself back from pointing out that everything nowadays made her cry. She'd cried the last time they made love, she'd cried over burning bread, and she'd cried a river when they'd slaughtered butt roast, even though that damned pig had bit her twice just the month before. Fenton looked a bit chagrined, but said nothing as he finished his pork sandwich and licked the barbecue sauce off his fingers. He stood up, leaned over, and picked up Carrie's chair, and then took hold of her plate. "I'll go talk to her. Joseph, you get the rest of the dishes to the sink. Liza, Chris, you best get on your way. Take the buggy, it will be quicker, and it gets dark about 5 these days. Y'all want to get back before it's too dark to see anything." Liza had a stack of books ready to go by the door. She pulled on a coat and shoved half of the stack into Chris's arms once he had finished zipping his coat. Outside, they quickly loaded up the wrapped pieces of pork haunch they wanted to use for trade. They didn't need much in the way of staples right now, but Chris had a very specific present in mind for this visit. He had seen the ring at the Trade Mart 2 weeks ago when they were there stocking up for the winter. It wasn't your typical wedding ring of diamonds and gold. Instead, what had struck him and drawn him in was the amazing color of green of the emerald set in the center. It was a square-cut emerald, with 4 fair-sized diamonds, 2 on each side, set in a white gold band. The emerald's color was a rich forest green. He had gazed at it and felt as if he were staring into Carrie's eyes. Her eye color changed, depending on her mood, from an almost lime green when she was mad to the deep forest green of the emerald right after they made love. It seemed that lately, all he had seen was the lime green, which snapped with lightning and fire. When Liza broke the silence, he realized they had already left the farm far behind. "You're getting the ring today, right?" She was the only one he had confided in, mainly because she had seen him talking with the woman who owned it, while Carrie was deep in bargaining for flour and sugar with one of the other townfolk. The old woman had elicited the promise from him that he build a new chicken coop and bring her 10 pounds of pork and 5 laying hens in the spring in exchange for the ring. The coop would be easy, and she had agreed to wait for another month for that, but the deposit on the ring was the pork, and he aimed to deliver it in time to pick up the ring and give it to Carrie for Christmas. "Yeah, I'm getting the ring." He paused, thinking about Carrie's incredible mood swings lately, while mainly they had swung between depressed to irritable and sometimes plain insane. "Liza, do you think something's wrong with Carrie? I mean, do you think she still wants to marry me?" The teenager snorted. "Are you kidding? Carrie loves you, and you love her. If anything, I'll bet she's just wondering why you haven't gotten around to asking her yet." "But I did. At the end of September, I asked her, and she said yes." Liza's neck snapped towards him so quickly he was afraid she had whiplash. "You asked Carrie to marry you?" Her hands had gone slack on the reins, but the horse plodded on. They were almost to the site of the burned-out Western Front trucks, and not too far from town. Ichabod knew the way by heart. "Well, yeah, and she said yes, but I didn't have a ring then. I've been looking for one, and—" His voice faded weakly away in the face of yet another angry Purdue woman. "Have you two, done it?" Liza asked, looking angry and a tiny bit scared. "Well, yeah." "When? How often did you use protection?" The questions came hard and fast, and Chris felt like he was talking to his mother, not a 14-year-old girl. This was crazy. Why had he even said anything? Now she was going to be mad at him too, and he didn't know what the hell he had done wrong this time either. "Eliza, I shouldn't be talking about this with you." "Christopher Michael Aronson." Now she sounded like Fenton. "Just answer the damned question." Jesus, he seemed to be in for it again. "September, around harvest time, when your Gramps got hurt in the barn. And, well, a couple of times since." That was a terrible understatement. "And do you see any protection around here?" He had even checked with the trade mart, carefully, of course, to see if he could trade for condoms. No such luck, and the pharmacy, what was left of the burned-out shell, was laughable. Shit. What? He was getting frustrated and pissed. Both of them on his ass, ripping his head off and shitting down his neck. Damn, but... Carrie is pregnant. Chris's mind went blank. They passed the lookouts, and Liza collected herself enough to wave at them, and jostled Chris to do the same. He put up a hand and waved woodenly, his mind completely and totally overwhelmed. Pregnant. Pregnant! Oh, God, pregnant! Liza spoke again. "And worse yet, Gramps is talking to her right now. Sure as anything it will come out, and he'll just shoot you before he bothers asking questions." She shook her head. "Damn, Chris, I thought you were smarter than that." She patted his leg. "Been nice knowing you." "Oh, thanks so much for the vote of confidence," he replied sarcastically, and his bowels twisted. She grinned at him then. "Now, when you see the shotgun, run. I'll try and buy you some time, maybe a few 100 yards, enough to make it to the tree line. And remember, avoid the lake. We know you don't do well out there." She was grinning now, obviously remembering how they had found him, laid up with a broken ankle after taking a fall into the bog they still insisted on calling a lake. "Ha ha ha, geez, Liza, you are just so damn funny." He glared at her, his mind still reeling. He sobered. "Do you really think she's pregnant?" They were nearly in town, and he said it quietly, under his breath in case anyone heard their conversation. There were a few folks walking, wrapped up like it was an Arctic winter rather than a cool 30 degrees outside. Liza nodded with a smirk. "Oh yeah, I remember Mom getting that way when she got pregnant with Joseph. Had Dad running scared until they both figured out what the hell was going on. Dad had a vasectomy after I was born, so it didn't even dawn on them what was happening until she was a few months along. So much for a vasectomy being foolproof. Did you know that shit can grow back? Anyway, Carrie's never been what you'd call regular with her period, so if she knows, she's just now figured it out." "Why wouldn't she tell me, though?" Chris protested. "I mean, we love each other. I'm not going anywhere. I want to marry her, and I figured eventually that also meant having babies with her." He stopped then, imagining Carrie's stomach swelling full and round. Thought of the child growing inside, and months from now, the feel of a tiny baby nestled in his arms. Blonde hair, and would her eyes be blue like his or green like Carrie's? For some reason, he couldn't imagine a boy, only a girl who would wrap his heart around her little finger and... "Hell, Chris, I don't know why she wouldn't tell you. Maybe she's scared. There aren't any hospitals nearby. I mean, I know I've been studying, but I'm not a full-on doctor. Hell, I'm not even a midwife. And maybe she's afraid you don't want kids, that you won't love her if she goes and gets fat." "Pregnant isn't fat. Pregnant is beautiful." He said it forcefully, and a bit louder than he intended. One woman looked at them curiously as they passed. "Oh, Chris," Liza sighed. Chris made Carl look like such an idiot, and she liked Carl a lot. Chris had a way of making everyone feel special, loved, and accepted. She smiled up at him. "Just get the ring. We'll go back home and it will all work out. You'll see. She loves you and you love her. Despite all of Gramps' tough words, he approves of you. He knows you love Carrie as much as he does." She pulled on the reins and stopped the horse. They were a block from the Trade Mart. "I'm going to Carl's. I'll meet you in an hour at the Trade Mart." She slipped down out of the seat after handing Chris the reins. As the buggy pulled away, Liza called after him, "Don't get into trouble." He just waved at her in dismissal. For only being 14 years old, the girl was already a mother hen. It seemed to run in the family. The Trade Mart was busy, and the street was full of townfolk. There was barely room for Ichabod to be strapped to the bike rack, but he managed to find a spot that required a bit of a squeeze. The horse wasn't going anywhere until he was done. Chris stopped by the hardware store and dropped off half of a sweet potato pie that Carrie and Liza had made the night before for Mr. Lyles. The ancient man was close to entering his 106th year, which blew Chris's mind. Most of the old man's teeth were gone, so sweet potato pie was right up his alley. The bent and fragile old man had visited the farm twice in the summer, but the onset of winter slowed him down and confined him to town. He was a bit of a celebrity, considering his advanced age, and the rest of the townfolk pitched in to keep him fed and warm in his little apartment above the hardware store. He spent a few minutes talking with the old man, relayed Fenton and the rest of the family's greetings, and promised to bring chicken soup on his next visit. One of the chickens wasn't producing eggs as much as she used to. It was time to make way for younger layers. Old Otis loved Carrie's homemade chicken noodle soup and asked about it whenever they visited, no matter the weather. He said his goodbyes and headed toward the Trade Mart. As he walked in the door, he saw a familiar, unwelcome face. Wes Perkins. The man had added another knife to his collection. He was practically his own armory, with 2 long hunting knives, a short, tiny, curved knife in a sheath, and today he was sporting what looked like a .44 Magnum, and the ubiquitous rifle he carried with him everywhere. At least this time Chris didn't feel so underdressed for the occasion. Carrie had given him a ruggedly wicked hunting knife the month of their anniversary. He had been embarrassed that he hadn't remembered and didn't have something to give her in return. It was probably the lack of gift, or remembering that it had been exactly 1 month since they made love for the first time, that had started the emotional roller coaster they had been on ever since. He had also begun carrying a M1911, a .45 caliber, well-maintained pistol that Fenton had used in Vietnam. There had been reports of isolated attacks by deserters or small bands of men. They were usually in search of food or ammunition. They would sneak in, take what they wanted, and usually leave without engaging the locals. But one girl had been raped, and another older couple had been killed. Both attacks had occurred within the last month. Fenton had made sure everyone, except for Joseph, was armed at all times, around the farm or off the property. Chris met Wes's unfriendly stare with an equally calm one. He would stand his ground and fuck Wes if he didn't like it. Wes began to move forward and intercept Chris. He probably wanted to stop him from entering the trade mart, but Mrs. Jennings had spied him at that moment and called across the store, gesturing for him to come and see her. She smiled at him, and he ignored Wes and strode over. "Christopher, how are you?" Not everyone in the town was an asshole like Perkins. Alice Jennings was a widower, with no children. She was also Tiptonville's librarian. She looked around. "Where's Liza? I have a book for her." "She'll be here soon, Miss Jennings." He gave her a light hug. "She's visiting a friend." Alice sighed. "I imagine it's that Owens boy. Ah, young love. A bit of a nerd, but then so is Liza, bless that child. I found a book for her that will fill in her education nicely." She reached back to a shelf and pulled out the book. "Here it is, Epidemiology, Beyond the Basics." She started to hand it to him. "She'll be here soon, Miss Jennings. Would you like to give it to her yourself?" "Oh, yes, dear, that will be fine. In fact," she nodded, shelving the book, "I really need to check if she's ready to move away from obstetrics or if she was interested in advanced surgical procedures next." She stared at him for a moment, and he waited patiently. "Oh, dear, I'm sorry. You want the ring, don't you, dear?" "Yes, ma'am. I brought the piece you asked for." He handed the neatly wrapped pork section over to her. "And I can come by after Christmas and start on the coop." Her eyes lit up. "Oh, Christopher, it's far more meat than I had asked for. Are you sure?" She was thin, and Chris wondered if she ate much meat at all these days. "Fenton wrapped it and sends his regards. He sure appreciates all you've been doing for Liza." The old man had been impressed with the large tomes of medical information that Liza was slowly absorbing and discussing. His forehead wound had been sutured so neatly that there was only a tiny reddish scar that remained. "Oh, it is nice to have such an apt pupil. Liza is quite a brilliant young woman, you know." At that moment, Liza appeared at his elbow. "Well, thanks, Miss Jennings." She immediately spied the book on epidemiology. Alice had partially shelved it, but it was sticking out prominently from the rest. "Oh my, you found the epidemiology book." Her eyes sparkled. Most girls would look like that over a new dress or shoes, but Liza was not like most girls. Alice handed her the book, and the girl thumbed through the table of contents with intense interest. "Oh, multiple regression techniques, and it has an appendix for the test of homogeneity of stratified estimates." She looked up and grinned at Chris and Alice. "This is perfect, thank you." "Careful there, Liza, your inner geek is showing." Her grin turned to a glare. Alice, finally remembering what Chris had been so patiently waiting for, reached into her pockets and pulled out a small box. "Christopher, dear, I shined it up for you." She handed the box over. It was brown leather, worn in spots. "I tried to find a box to put it in, dear, and I'm sorry, this is the best I could find." Liza gasped as he opened the box. The emerald and diamonds were blindingly brilliant. "A little toothpaste and water is all it took." Alice's voice sounded a bit misty. Chris was too distracted by the ring to notice the woman's tears, but Liza did, and put her hand on the old woman's arm. Larry Jennings had died nearly 2 years ago, and Alice still missed him terribly. Chris stared at the ring, everything inside of him churning. God, he hoped she liked it. What if she didn't? What if she wanted something more traditional? Liza's voice reassured his fears. Chris, it's beautiful. It matches her eyes exactly. He looked over at the girl and relaxed. If Liza, a geeky sci-fi and epidemiology textbook-loving non-girly girl, thought it was beautiful, then it had to be special. Chris knew a lot of things. He knew about war and fighting. He knew hard work and how to fix leaks and raise crops. He knew football, but he was absolutely sure of his own ignorance when it came to women's jewelry. He also had no idea that if this part of the world had still run on cold, hard cash, he would have had to fork over a lot of it. He was holding a ring worth nearly $5,000. He didn't know that Alice Jennings had been given the ring by her mother. He didn't realize how special the ring was to the old woman, or even that the emerald that was mounted in the ring was her birthstone. Chris only knew that it had spoken to him, reminded him of Carrie's eyes after they made love, or kissed, or laughed. He desperately hoped Carrie would like it, and that Fenton wouldn't shoot him before he had a chance to give it to her. He smiled at Alice Jennings. "Thank you, ma'am. Thank you so much." She smiled in return and patted his cheek softly. "You are welcome, young Christopher. Do bring her in after you've given it to her. I would so like to see it on her hand." "Yes, ma'am, I will." They said their goodbyes and headed towards the exit. Chris had snapped the box shut and put it away carefully in his jacket. He was in the process of zipping the coat when Wes Perkins stepped into his path. "Maybe you should watch where you're going, soldier." Wes stood a good half of a head taller and smelled dangerous. It was a sharp gunpowder and oil scent. He was close, purposely so. He stood inside Chris's personal space, and it was an obvious challenge. Chris felt Liza's hand settle on his sleeve. "We need to be getting back home now, Mr. Perkins." She said it with a level voice, but there was a slight tremor in her hand. She was afraid for Chris. Around them, there was a lull in conversation. Chris could feel a dozen sets of eyes watching and saying nothing. Wes ignored Liza. He glared at Chris, tried to stare him down. Liza tugged on Chris's arm. "Come on, Chris, let's go." She tugged on his sleeve firmly. Chris allowed her to pull him to the right and around Perkins, keeping eye contact until Liza jerked him insistently through the door and down the street. All right, you can stop walking me like a dog on a leash now," he snapped at her irritably as she attempted to shove him up into the buggy. "I'm going already." Liza's face was pale. "Let's just get out of here, now." She was shaking. Okay, chill out. We're going. His good mood had vanished. What the fuck was up with that guy anyway? It was like Perkins knew he had been in the Western Front. And that wasn't possible. No one knew but the Perdues, and they sure as hell weren't going to say anything. The ride out of town was uneventful, but it was tense and silent. They passed the lookouts and the awful burned-out wrecks of trucks. The burned and blackened skeletons still hung from the windows or lay crushed underneath. Chris's stomach turned every time he saw it. The town had left them there on purpose as a warning, but it made him sick to see it. No matter what those men had done, they were people. They had been alive and breathing. It didn't seem right to leave their bodies out there, exposed to the elements and not given a proper burial. Then again, he had heard some of the stories, whispered to him by the girls when Fenton wasn't around. The Western Front had done terrible things to the citizens of Tiptonville. They had more than earned the hatred the townspeople felt towards them. He glanced over at Liza and saw a tear trickle down her nose, then another and another. They were still over a mile from the farm. He pulled Ichabod to a stop, turned and looked at her. The girl was hunched over, arms crossed in front of her protectively, and as she noticed his gaze, she began to sob hysterically. "What the—" Chris sighed and closed his eyes. This was definitely not his day to deal with the Purdue women. "Look, Liza, everything's fine. The guy's an asshole, don't worry about it." "He knows." "What? What does he know?" "That you were in the Western Front." He started to scoff, then stopped and tried to meet her eyes. They flicked up, saw his, and dropped to the buggy floor, and she began to cry even harder. "Liza, what did you do?" "It's what I didn't do. I mean, I tried to burn the clothes. Oh God, Gramps is gonna kill me." "Liza." He grabbed her shoulders, turned her towards him, and forced her to meet his eyes. "I'm gonna kill you if you don't tell me what the heck you are talking about." It rushed out in one large torrent. "I didn't burn the clothes. Your uniform. I mean, I tried and they were burning and I heard someone coming, so I ran away quick. They must have seen the fire, put it out, and found the clothes." He gave her a small shake. "Must have?" She cried harder. "When I went back the next day to check, the clothes were gone." Chris closed his eyes. "Crap, crap, crap, double crap, triple crap, shit." "You hate me, don't you?" Liza sounded so tiny, so childlike and fearful. He opened his eyes and saw her wincing in his grasp. "No, Liza, I don't hate you." He struggled to explain his emotions. "I'm worried. I'm scared I've brought trouble to your door, to all of you, and I don't know what to do." "I'll tell Gramps." "We'll tell Fenton together, right after I propose to Carrie and right before he shoots me for knocking up his eldest grandchild." He managed a small smile. "Like you said earlier, it will all work out." That earned him a weak laugh in return. He set Ichabod to a nice trot, and the last 20 minutes were spent with cracks about shotguns and ducking for cover. As they entered the private road that led straight through to the farmhouse, Chris could see he wasn't too far from being right. Fenton had had enough time to not only clean the shotgun, but reassemble it. It was resting across his folded arms, and the old man looked pissed. Liza took it all in and summed it up in one succinct word, which she muttered under her breath. "Shit. Eliza Molly Ann Purdue," Fenton barked. "You know I can read lips." Liza winced in response. "Boy, you have got some explaining to do." He caressed the barrel of the shotgun and adjusted it so that it aimed ever so slightly in Chris's direction. "You better show him what you got, Chris. Now," Liza whispered, but Chris had a different idea about how this was all going to play out. "No." He climbed down from the buggy, unbuckled the knife and pistol, and set them up on the seat next to Liza. "Sir, I would like to speak with Carrie, please." Fenton pursed his lips, reached over and yanked the door to the farmhouse open and bellowed for her. A moment later, she appeared, her eyes puffy and red. They widened when they saw Fenton's shotgun. Chris wasted no time. He strode to the porch, knelt on his knee at the top step, and looked up into Carrie's eyes. "I'm sorry it took me this long to find it. I love you, Carrie Lynn Purdue, so please." He fished the box out of his pocket and held it up to her. "Will you marry me before your grandfather goes and puts me out of his misery?" This earned a choked laugh from Liza and Carrie, and an angry grunt from Fenton. Carrie reached out and took the box from his hand, opening it slowly and gasping when she did. "Oh my God, it's beautiful." Chris sighed, partially in relief, and then in exasperation as she began to cry. Why did they always have to cry? She pulled him up to her and hugged him violently. He could feel her tears soaking his neck, and he struggled to breathe as she clung to him and cried harder. "Yes, yes, yes, I'll marry you." "Young woman, don't you have some news of your own?" Fenton still sounded pissed. Carrie jumped a little at his voice and pulled away from Chris, looking a little scared. She struggled to utter the words. I'm pretty sure I'm pregnant. Her eyes searched his eyes for rejection or anger. She had been afraid to tell him, afraid he would leave or maybe not want to have kids. They had never talked about it, and they were both so young, something that Gramps had repeated over and over until she had dissolved into tears and he had stomped away. Chris reached down and placed a hand on her stomach. There was the tiniest of bulges there. It was firm, not soft or mushy, and he wondered at the miracle growing inside. His child. Their child. He looked into her eyes, watched them turn that emerald green he loved to see. We need to get married soon, then. How does January sound to you? She laughed and hugged him again. Fenton snorted, but this time it was with less anger. He stomped down the stairs, grabbed Ichabod's reins, and began to lead the buggy and Liza away to the barn. I'm bringing my shotgun to the wedding, Fenton said as he strode away.